So we're going to continue our series this morning on mirrors and windows and doors. And if you've been keeping up, I'll give a little explanation later, but try to see yourself in the text, see a window of transparency to which you can look for a situation, and I'll explain all this in a minute, and then look for a door of invitation. And the scripture reading this morning we're going to talk about is Genesis 32, and it's verses 22 through 31. Is this part of the story of Jacob. Now that same night, after Jacob had prayed, he got up and he took his 2 wives, his 2 maids, his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream, and likewise everything that he had. Jacob was left alone and wrestled another with him until the dawn arose. When the other saw that they did not prevail against Jacob, they touched or struck his hip socket, and so Jacob's hip bone became dislocated as he wrestled with them. Then the other said, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go, for except unless you bless me." And the other said to Jacob, "What is your name?" To this he said, "Jacob." Then the other said, "You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with humans and have prevailed." But the other answered. Then Jacob asked the other, "Please tell me your name." But the other answered, "Why are you asking my name like this?" And there the other blessed him. So Jacob called the place Peniel, which means face of God. For, Jacob said, "I have seen God face to face, and yet my life is preserved." And the sun rose upon him as he passed Peniel, limping because of his hip. May God bless and challenge us in the reading of this word. You know, no matter what, we talk about it all the time, it's just God is with us. We have our stories. We all have our stories. And this simple truth of knowing that God is with us through our stories that we hear every week. God loves us no matter what. And this has been a key these past couple of weeks as we've been learning to look at Scripture through the mirrors and windows and doors methodology. So a little bit more about that. So in every text that we read in Scripture, especially the narrative stories, and that's why we're taking some of these narratives apart, is to be able to look at the text, and it's not just something that happened thousands of years ago. It's relevant to us because we can see ourselves in the story as if in a mirror. Now, we see ourselves there, yes, but it's important then, once we see ourselves, to not walk away, to say, okay, what's going on here, and how can I grow into this text and grow from this text? What is God trying to say to me? Where is God in the text? And that sense of when the character and God become transparent, lines begin to blur and thin and stretch, and a transparency occurs. And then between God and the character, there is this openness, and transformation can happen. There's a window that we can use then to look through at our own life situations and figure out, what is this relevant to in my life? Where can I compare this to that has happened in the past? What am I looking forward to in the future that this might inform? Does that make sense so far? Then, if we stay with the text long enough, a door of invitation will appear, because there is always a door of invitation in Scripture. God is always inviting us to walk through, do something new. Yes, we might hate it over there, but that's okay too, because God is with us no matter what. And you know what? Sometimes we walk through a door, we get to come back through that door. And God says, "You don't like it over here? Let's move back and we'll go through a different door." But God is always inviting us to walk through a door. Our choice is whether or not to just turn that handle. Amen? Okay, so this morning we met Jacob. Now, Jacob is a tough character, but he's also one of my favorites, mainly because he is so very human. He is a mess. Jacob is a mess. Jacob is a twin, okay? But even in the womb, the scripture says that he was wrestling with his brother. Esau is his older brother's name, and when he was born, Jacob was so incensed on getting out. They say in Scripture that Esau was born, but Jacob's little fist was around Esau's foot. Now, if that's important enough, that detail to put into the text, we know, and we have an indication of just how messed up this guy is, all right? From the beginning, we see him. He's a scrapper. He's tough. He grabs what he wants, and he takes it by any means possible. The very name Jacob means trickster, swindler, manipulator, deceiver. Can you imagine? Can you imagine naming a sweet little baby manipulator? And they probably thought it was cute, right? They were like, oh, look, the little trickster. It's so cute. Except we know that we grow into what we're called, don't we? We talked about this last week. Sometimes those names or nicknames, those labels that we're given, even in jest, they stick. And they become how we're identified, and often they become how we identify ourselves. We internalize them. Our names become our reputation, and quite interestingly, as no small aside, the word name in Hebrew also means reputation. Now, it doesn't take long for Jacob to grow into that identity. With the help of his mom, who named him Trickster, he tricks his brother out of his firstborn inheritance and birthright. And Esau, the older brother, got so angry that Jacob fears for his life. So mom steps in and gives him guidance one more time and tells him, better get out of here. That's it. He leaves the country. So for the next several decades, Jacob lives in another country. And by the time we meet him, he has worked so hard and tricked so many people and manipulated his situation. He has spent decades building a life based on security and for his own happiness. He is immersed in self. By the time we meet him in our story today, he has a large family. He has flocks, he has herds, he has lots of possessions, he has servants, he has concubines. And because he's manipulated the system to get what wasn't rightfully his, he has 2 wives. As no small aside, if anybody ever tries to bash you with the biblical version of marriage, cite Jacob, right? He's taking all of his family now back home. It's time. He knows it's time. Except there's only one problem. Esau is still alive, and he is still angry. And now Jacob hears that Esau is coming at him to meet him with 400 soldiers. Now let's stop a second to try to find a mirror, okay? Because we're trying to do this methodically. Have you ever done something wrong or done someone wrong and then had to go back and confront them? Do you remember what that felt like? Or have you or your family ever faced a situation where you felt worried, scared, threatened? Have you been through a time when the future seemed frightening to you personally? Well, I can't speak for you, but I can speak for Jacob. He was scared to death. So he prays this fabulous prayer to God. Oh my gosh, what a great prayer. Pours everything out to God, except this is a God that he only half believes in. when he calls God and prays to God in that fabulous noted prayer that everybody talks about of vulnerability and transparency, he actually calls God, God of my father, God of my grandfather. Never claims God as his God. Now that is telling. It speaks to the fact that Jacob was born into a faith. That faith wasn't chosen by him, it was given, and it hasn't yet become personal to him. He's still on the fence about it, and he's not living into the life that he has been actually given to by God, because he's not recognizing that his life belongs to God. He's still under the impression that his life belongs to him. And so he's going to secure what he can get, when he can get it, from whomever he can get it, by whatever means necessary to get it. He hasn't recognized that he is part of something bigger than himself. He's a part of God's healing plan. So after he prays, probably swallows hard, takes his family where he believes them to be safe, which is the other side of the river. And, oh, by the way, he also puts everything he owns over there. I mean, if he makes it through this, then he's going to need stuff, right, at the end. And that's a detail, again, that I just love in this story. Because so many times that we're told that we're in crisis, and, you know, when you're in crisis and you're in a foxhole, and that's when our priorities come to the surface, and we learn what's important, and we can sort out what's important. Except everything that's important to Jacob is on the other side of that river, including his stuff. Because what's important to him, again, his security and his personal happiness. And he doesn't want to risk losing any of it. So then he goes back to the other side of the river and he waits. And he wrestles with something, the text says, another, through the night. Now, we don't know what another was at this point, but let's just talk about the act of wrestling. Was anybody a high school wrestler? Probably. Thanks, Mike. Coming through. I thought better of it in a minute. You're wrestling with somebody, it's a physical thing, yes? Your muscles are tightened. Your whole body is involved. You can't separate parts out and just relax part of your body and then engage part of your body. When you're wrestling, your entire body is tense. And you're filled with adrenaline, and you're sweating, and your heart is rushing, and your breath is shallow and very quick. Step back. If you haven't found your mirror yet, here's another opportunity. Have you ever spent the night wrestling with fear or anxiety or worry? If you have, you know how Jacob's feeling. And Jacob won't stop this cycle. I mean, how many of us can stop the cycle when we're in the middle of wrestling with something in the middle of the night? But here's what happens. He can't stop the fear of losing control. He can't stop the fear of wanting to be powerful. He can't stop this quest to live a life on the basis of security. He can't face what might be coming next, loss of independence. But the thing is, he's fighting so hard to keep control that the very thing that is battling him strikes back. His hip becomes dislocated. In other words, Jacob loses his footing in this situation. He loses his bearing. He can no longer retain his balance and keep up this charade of control or rely on his strength. For Jacob, the bottom just dropped out. What a moment. What a moment. When we realize we can't control everything. Actually, when we realize we can't really control anything. When we can't win our way. When our way won't work, can't work. And in the end, we realize we're just as weak and vulnerable as everybody else. What a moment. Everything is upside down. And as much as there may have been anxiety before, now everything is tumbling. And Jacob's tumbling. But as he does, his mind empties of everything he was sure about. It has to. The lines begin to blur and stretch and thin toward transparency. But instead of running from it this time and letting go of everything and running back to himself and his land of security that he has in the past, this time Jacob decides to just stay with it. To hold on to the one who has brought him to this defenseless point. And frankly, it's because he doesn't like the way it feels. And Jacob clings so tightly that these two are entwined as one being. And maybe for the first time, Jacob looks through that transparent window at the one he's been fighting this whole time and glimpses the divine. And maybe for the first time he realizes he's not alone. He's holding and being held by one who fights not to win some wrestling match, but to win us to love. And Jacob starts to quiver. Of course, he starts to quiver. And maybe he feels the emotion rise within him. You know how it gets to right to the back of the throat. And his eyes fill with water and maybe blinks back the tears. And love speaks. Let go. Let go. Now our window appears. When have you heard the voice of love asking you to just let go? To let go of what you thought was important, or what you are thinking, or what you are sure of, or what you are fighting. To let go of what keeps you up at night, or what's holding you back from living a life following God. When have you heard the voice of love telling you to let go of who you think you are, or who others have told you you are? To let go of the names that they've given you or the ones that you've given yourself. When has love come to set you free to be who you are? When has love spoken to you to let you know you're not alone? So yeah, Jacob holds on to love. But he needs one thing for himself. And it's not any birthright from daddy, or affirmation from mommy, or accolades from the world. In the presence of the divine, Jacob asks for a blessing. And blessing in Hebrew simply means an increase in joy and peace, shalom and wholeness. Jacob asks to be able to see life in a new way. Jacob asks for faith. Jacob asks, how do I follow the way of God? How do I live in a way, increase my faith so that I can live in a way that brings wholeness and healing? And a door opens. But just like for us, it's up to Jacob whether or not to go through. If he's to follow God into wholeness and healing, it can't be out of what's in it for him. And it can't be just because he's dislocated his hip and he's hurting and he can't find his balance. No. He has to be able to take stock of who he is, fully. He's got to give all of himself to God all of himself, the good, the bad, the ugly. He's got to give all of that over to God. And so the divine asks and pulls the door open. What is your name? And Jacob responds with everything that he knows to be true about himself. Every vulnerable, transparent thing he can think of, Jacob just pours out. My name is Jacob. I'm a trickster, I'm a manipulator, I'm a liar, I'm a swindler, I'm a deceiver, and everything else that has identified him for the whole of his life. And when Jacob is done confessing who he thinks he is, God tells him the truth. That's not your name. That's not who you are. Your name is Israel. Your name is striven with God. Your name is mine. And I have big plans for you. And then God blesses Jacob, and in that blessing, the sun rose behind him, and he walks from that place with a limp. Stay with me, all you limpers. Everybody who has ever had an encounter that has left you changed, or scarred, or left you with an identifier that you've been through something. Anybody who has wrestled with doubt or fear or being good enough or being pious enough or humble enough or straight enough. Those of us who have scars so deep you can see them and people can recognize you by your wounds. Look again. Not just one door opened, there's a whole lot of doors that are just opened up. Now you can choose the door that suits you. Perhaps you're ready to choose the door that Jacob walked through. The one that Jacob walked through led to his brother, not afraid, but bearing gifts, hoping for the best, expecting who knows what. But when he reached his brother could recognize what Jacob had been through as well. And they reconciled. It was a beautiful moment. So maybe that's the door for you. Maybe you're ready. Go back, reconcile, heal, be whole. But maybe you're invited to take your worries and fears and anxiety and enter the door that leads to the divine wrestling match. Listen, if you pick that door and you're afraid of getting into a wrestling match with the divine, don't worry about it. You think you're tough, the divine can take it. You think you're worrisome, you think you've got all this stuff to give and you won't be accepted in that match? Oh yeah, you're going to be accepted in that match because it's not for you. It's not for God being worried about what you're going to present. God already knows all that stuff. It's for you. Because love will never let go of you. And God can take anything you can throw at him. God, sometimes we wrestle with stuff and we go through stuff and we don't even see until later on that it was God that we were wrestling with. And we had to be moved to a new place. And the only way we could get there is if God put the squeeze on us. Amen? You're here, right? Listen. Maybe your door is just the one that recognizes that the faith that you were born into doesn't have to be your faith. That the faith that you were born into, that your parents maybe gave you, or your church maybe gave you, doesn't have to define you. That you can find a way to love that defies those, that your faith can become personal to you, that you can go into the arms of love knowing that you'll be accepted there and loved there. Or, even before that, there's a door that opened that invites you to see that perhaps you've been trying to control and secure everything in your life. And maybe you've been living for that security. Maybe you've been living for that, just that personal happiness. And yeah, I don't want to depend on anybody or anything. I'm going to just get what I want. I'm going to get mine. There's also an invitation there, a door, to just look in the mirror. But the door I'm most hopeful about today is the door that leads to naming before God everything we think or have learned defines us. That's the one I'm most hopeful that you'll take the invitation to go through. If you take that door, if you continue one step into that door, stay in that moment. The divine always invites you to name all of that. Why? So that you can be given a new name. You are not who you are taught you are. You are not who you define yourself by. The only one who can define you is God. Amen? What does God say about you? You can say all your name, and the only thing God says back is, that is not who you are. You are striven with God. You are still here. You are mine. And I have big plans for you. God bless you this morning.